Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates worried about makeup and boys, she dreamed of serving her country. The daughter of a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, Sarah understood sacrifice from an early age. Her mother, Maria, had immigrated from El Salvador with nothing but hope and determination, working as a cleaning lady during the day and a waitress at night. Growing up in a rough neighborhood in East Los Angeles, Sarah witnessed violence and poverty daily. Gang members controlled the streets, and many of her friends saw only 2 paths: join the gangs or accept a life of struggle. But Sarah's mother had bigger dreams for her daughter. Every night, despite her exhaustion, Maria would sit with Sarah and help her with homework, telling her stories of courage and perseverance. "Mija, education and honor are the only things no one can take from you," Maria would say, her weathered hands holding Sarah's textbooks. "You can be anything you want, but you must work twice as hard as everyone else." Sarah took those words to heart. She excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and science. Her teachers noticed her potential and encouraged her to apply for college scholarships. But Sarah had a different calling. At 17, she announced to her mother that she wanted to join the Marines after graduation. Maria was terrified. The thought of her only child going to war made her sleepless nights even longer. "Why the military, Mija? You're smart enough for college, for a safe career." "Because I want to serve something bigger than myself, Mama. I want to protect people like us, people who can't protect themselves." The day Sarah left for boot camp at Paris Island was the hardest day of Maria's life. She watched her 18-year-old daughter board the bus with a mixture of pride and fear that would never fully leave her heart. Boot camp was everything Sarah expected and more. The drill instructors pushed recruits beyond their physical and mental limits. Many of her fellow recruits were young men who questioned whether a small Latina woman belonged among Marines. Sarah proved them wrong daily, often outperforming male recruits in physical fitness tests and tactical exercises. Drill instructor Staff Sergeant Reynolds, a 20-year veteran with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could shatter glass, took special notice of Sarah. Not because she was struggling, but because she excelled. During a particularly grueling obstacle course, when several male recruits failed to complete the challenge, Sarah finished first with time to spare. "Martinez," Reynolds barked, "front and center." Sarah ran to position, standing at perfect attention. The other recruits watched, expecting her to be disciplined for some unknown infraction. "You just smoked half these boys, and some of them outweigh you by 60 pounds. How?" "Sir, I refuse to let my size determine my limitations, sir." Reynolds nodded slowly. "Outstanding, Marine. That's the mindset that wins wars." After graduating boot camp with honors, Sarah was selected for advanced infantry training. This was unusual for women at the time, as combat roles were just beginning to open up. She specialized in explosive ordnance disposal, one of the most dangerous jobs in the military. Her first deployment came 18 months later. She was assigned to a Marine unit heading to Afghanistan, where improvised explosive devices were claiming American lives daily. Her job was to identify, disarm, and dispose of these deadly weapons that insurgents planted along roads and in buildings. The unit she joined had been deployed together twice before. They were tight-knit, experienced, and initially skeptical of the young woman assigned to handle their most dangerous situations. Corporal Mike Johnson, a farm boy from Iowa, voiced what many were thinking during her first week. "No offense, Martinez, but are you sure you can handle this? EOD isn't a job for someone your size." Sarah looked up from the equipment she was inspecting. At 5'4" and 125 pounds, she was indeed small compared to her fellow Marines. But her brown eyes held a determination that made Johnson take a step back. "My size didn't stop me from graduating top of my EOD class, Corporal. I'd suggest you worry about your own job and let me worry about mine." The conversation ended there, but the doubt lingered among some unit members. That doubt would disappear completely 3 weeks later. The unit was conducting a patrol in a village outside Kandahar when they received reports of a suspected IED in a school building. Local children attended classes there, and Afghan officials feared the device would detonate during school hours. Sarah was called in to investigate. The building was a simple concrete structure with 4 classrooms. Afghan police had evacuated everyone within a 2-block radius. Sarah entered alone, as protocol dictated, carrying 60 pounds of protective gear and detection equipment. The hallways echoed with her footsteps as she methodically swept each room. In the third classroom, her detector began chirping frantically. Behind the teacher's desk, someone had planted a sophisticated device designed to kill as many people as possible. The bomb was larger than anything Sarah had seen before, with multiple trigger mechanisms that suggested professional construction. She called for backup and established a safety perimeter. Then began the delicate process of rendering the device safe. Her hands moved with practiced precision, cutting wires and removing components while beads of sweat dripped down her face inside the heavy protective suit. 47 minutes later, she emerged from the building carrying the disabled device. The school was safe. Children could return to their classes. Her fellow Marines watched in silence as she methodically packed her equipment, finally seeing her not as a small woman trying to do a man's job, but as a professional Marine doing exactly what she was trained to do. "Outstanding work, Martinez," said Lieutenant Torres, the unit commander. "Those kids owe their lives to you." Over the following months, Sarah successfully disabled dozens of explosive devices. She saved countless civilian lives and protected her fellow Marines from hidden dangers. Her reputation grew throughout the region, with Afghan officials specifically requesting her expertise for particularly dangerous situations. But war has a way of testing everyone eventually, and Sarah's test came during what should have been a routine mission near the Pakistani border. Intelligence reports indicated insurgents had planted multiple devices along a supply route that coalition forces used regularly. Sarah's unit was tasked with clearing the road so supply convoys could safely reach forward operating bases. The mission began at dawn. Sarah had already disabled 2 devices when her detector indicated a third near a bridge that crossed a dry riverbed. The device was more sophisticated than the others, with a complex network of wires and multiple power sources. As she worked to disable it, insurgents who had been watching from nearby hills opened fire. The attack caught the unit off guard. Bullets ricocheted off the concrete bridge as Marines scrambled for cover. Sarah was exposed in the open, halfway through disabling the device. She had 2 choices: abandon the bomb and seek shelter, knowing it would later kill coalition forces, or continue working while under enemy fire. She chose to continue working. Bullets whistled over her head as she focused on the remaining wires. Her training had prepared her for working under pressure, but nothing could have prepared her for the sound of automatic weapons fire echoing around her, while her hands performed delicate work on explosive devices. Lance Corporal Davis, positioned about 50 meters away behind a concrete barrier, watched in amazement as Sarah calmly continued her work. "She's not even flinching," he muttered to Johnson, who was crouched beside him. "That woman has ice in her veins," Johnson replied, his earlier doubts about Sarah completely evaporated. The firefight lasted 23 minutes. When it ended, 3 insurgents were dead, and the road was clear of explosive devices. Sarah had completed her job while under direct enemy fire, never once leaving her position or abandoning the dangerous device that threatened future convoys. That night, Lieutenant Torres submitted Sarah for a Bronze Star Medal with Valor Device, citing her exceptional courage under fire and her dedication to protecting both military personnel and Afghan civilians. The medal ceremony took place 2 months later at the forward operating base. Sarah's mother had flown halfway around the world to attend, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter receive one of the military's highest honors for heroism. "I'm so proud of you, Mija," Maria whispered as she hugged her daughter after the ceremony. "Your courage makes my heart both proud and terrified." Sarah's deployment ended 3 months later. She had disabled over 40 explosive devices, saved countless lives, and earned the deep respect of every Marine in her unit. As she prepared to return home, her fellow Marines threw a farewell party in her honor. Corporal Johnson, the same man who had questioned her abilities on her first week, stood up to address the gathering. "Marines, we've served with a lot of brave people, but Martinez here is special. She's got more courage in her little finger than most people have in their entire body. It's been an honor serving with her." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the Afghan heat. These men had become her brothers, and their respect meant everything to her. But Sarah's story was far from over. Her second deployment would test her in ways that no training could prepare her for, and the scars she would carry home would change her life forever. As she boarded the transport plane that would take her back to the United States, Sarah had no way of knowing that her greatest challenges lay ahead. The plane lifted off from the dusty airfield, carrying Sarah away from the desert that had made her a hero. In the cargo hold below, her gear included the bronze star medal that represented her courage, but also memories of fallen comrades and the weight of responsibility that comes with being trusted to save lives in impossible situations. Sarah stared out the small window as Afghanistan disappeared below the clouds, already knowing she would return. The mission was far from complete, and Marines don't abandon their posts until the job is finished. Her mother would worry, and her friends back home wouldn't understand, but Sarah knew where she belonged. She belonged wherever Marines needed someone brave enough to walk toward danger while others ran away. She belonged wherever explosive devices threatened innocent lives. She belonged in service to something greater than herself, just as her mother had taught her so many years ago in their small apartment in East Los Angeles. The long flight home gave her time to think about her future. She had proven herself in combat, earned the respect of her peers, and saved numerous lives. But she knew this was just the beginning. The war in Afghanistan was escalating, and skilled EOD technicians were desperately needed. As the plane crossed over the Atlantic Ocean, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. She would volunteer for a second deployment, this time to one of the most dangerous regions in Afghanistan. It was a decision that would test her courage, her skill, and ultimately her ability to survive in ways she never imagined possible. Sarah's second deployment began 6 months after returning home. She had spent her leave visiting family, receiving additional training, and mentally preparing for what would be her most challenging assignment yet. This time, she was heading to Helmand Province, where Taliban forces had increased their use of sophisticated explosive devices that were claiming American lives at an alarming rate. The new unit she joined was different from her first deployment. These Marines had seen heavy combat for over 8 months, and they carried the weariness that comes with prolonged exposure to violence. Staff Sergeant Williams, the unit leader, was a career Marine from Detroit who had survived 3 previous deployments. His greeting to Sarah was direct and sobering. "Martinez, I've read your file. Impressive work on your first tour, but Helmand is different. The enemy here is smarter, better funded, and more determined. They've been studying our tactics, and they're adapting faster than we are. You're going to see devices here that make your previous work look like training exercises." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. She had prepared for this mentally, knowing that each deployment brought new challenges and increased dangers. What she hadn't prepared for was the personal cost that would come with this assignment. Her new team included Sergeant Rick Anderson, a EOD specialist from Texas who became her primary partner, and Lance Corporal Kevin Murphy, a young Marine from Boston who served as their communications specialist. The 3 worked closely together, with Sarah often taking point on the most dangerous devices due to her exceptional skill and calm under pressure. Their first month in Helmand was relatively quiet, with Sarah successfully disabling several roadside bombs without incident. The devices were indeed more sophisticated than those she had encountered previously, but her training and experience proved adequate for the challenges they presented. The calm didn't last. Intelligence reports began indicating that Taliban bomb makers were specifically targeting EOD teams. They had studied American tactics and were designing devices intended to kill the specialists sent to disable them. These bombs included secondary and tertiary devices that would detonate when EOD personnel approached, creating what military specialists called layered traps. Sarah's first encounter with these new tactics came during a patrol in a village, where local officials reported multiple suspicious devices. What appeared to be a single roadside bomb turned out to be an elaborate setup designed to lure EOD specialists into a kill zone. As Sarah approached the primary device, her detector indicated additional explosives positioned around the area. Someone had spent considerable time and resources creating a trap specifically designed to kill people like her. The realization sent a chill down her spine, but she methodically began mapping the entire area to understand the full scope of the threat. "Martinez, talk to me," came Anderson's voice through her radio. He was positioned a safe distance away, monitoring her progress. "It's a complex setup, Sarge. Primary device with at least 3 supporting charges positioned to create an overlapping kill zone. Whoever built this knows exactly how we operate. Sarah spent over 2 hours carefully mapping and disabling the connected devices. Her hands trembled slightly as she cut the final wire, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that comes with knowing that a single mistake would be her last. The successful completion of that mission earned her recognition from higher command, but it also marked her as a target. Taliban communications intercepted by intelligence analysts specifically mentioned the small American woman who was disrupting their operations. Over the following weeks, Sarah noticed that the devices she encountered seemed increasingly personal. They were designed not just to kill, but to challenge her specifically. Bomb makers were incorporating elements that required her particular skills to defeat, as if they were studying her techniques and developing countermeasures. "They're hunting you specifically," Anderson told her one evening as they reviewed intelligence reports. "Command thinks there's a Taliban bomb maker who's made it his personal mission to kill you." Sarah absorbed this information without visible emotion, though internally she felt the weight of being specifically targeted by an enemy she had never seen. "Then we'll have to make sure he doesn't succeed." The confrontation that would change Sarah's life forever came during what should have been a routine mission in a market area where civilians frequently gathered. Intelligence indicated that insurgents had planted a device designed to kill civilians and create chaos that would blame on American forces. Sarah's team was called in to investigate and neutralize the threat before the market opened for daily business. Local police had evacuated the area, and Sarah began her approach to the suspected device location behind a fruit vendor's stall. What she found was the most sophisticated bomb she had ever encountered. Multiple components were interconnected in ways that suggested this was the work of the Taliban bomb maker who had been targeting her. Every wire, every connection seemed designed to challenge her specific knowledge and skills. As she began the delicate process of disabling the device, Anderson monitored from his position 50 meters away. Murphy maintained communication with command and coordinated with Afghan police who were securing the perimeter. Sarah had been working for 23 minutes when she discovered the trap within the trap. Hidden beneath the main device was a secondary bomb designed to detonate when the primary device was disabled. It was a technique she had never encountered before, and it caught her completely off guard. "Anderson, we have a problem," she radioed. "There's a secondary device here that's designed to activate when I disable the primary. I need to reconfigure my approach." "How long do you need?" Sarah studied the complex array of wires and components. "At least another hour, maybe more. This guy really knows what he's doing." What Sarah didn't know was that the Taliban bomb maker was watching from a building across the market square. He had spent weeks planning this specific trap for the American EOD specialist who had been disrupting his operations. He waited patiently as she worked, knowing that his creation would succeed where others had failed. Sarah continued working methodically, her training guiding her through each decision. She had successfully isolated the secondary device and was beginning to disable it when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. There was a third component she had missed, one designed to detonate based on time rather than her actions. "Anderson, I need immediate evacuation of everyone within 200 meters. Now." "What's your status?" "Triple-layered device with a timer component. I can't determine how much time is left, but everyone needs to be clear of this area immediately." Anderson began coordinating the expanded evacuation while Sarah raced to defeat the timer mechanism. Her hands moved with practiced precision, but she could feel time running out. Sweat dripped down her face inside her protective suit as she worked faster than she had ever worked before. She was cutting the final wire when the bomb maker, frustrated that his trap was failing, triggered a backup detonation device that Sarah had no way of detecting. The explosion was massive, designed not just to kill, but to destroy everything within a 100-meter radius. The blast lifted Sarah off her feet and threw her across the market square. Her protective suit absorbed some of the impact, but the sheer force of the explosion caused traumatic injuries that would change her life forever. Anderson and Murphy were knocked unconscious by the shockwave, their position just barely outside the device's kill zone. When Sarah regained consciousness 3 days later in a military hospital in Germany, the first thing she noticed was the smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines monitoring her vital signs. The second thing she noticed was that she couldn't feel her legs. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, a Navy surgeon who had been treating combat casualties for over 15 years, sat beside Sarah's bed when she woke up. Her expression was gentle but serious, the look of someone who had delivered life-changing news many times before. Maureen Martinez, I'm Dr. Hayes. You've been unconscious for 3 days following an explosion in Afghanistan. I need to discuss your injuries with you. Sarah's throat was dry, her voice barely a whisper. My team. Anderson and Murphy are both alive. Anderson has a concussion and some hearing loss, but he's going to be fine. Murphy has a broken arm and some lacerations, but he's already back on duty. Sarah felt relief flood through her body, followed immediately by dread as she realized what the doctor wasn't telling her. My legs. Dr. Hayes took a deep breath. The explosion caused severe trauma to your lower spine and legs. We've performed multiple surgeries to save your life and preserve as much function as possible. The good news is that you're alive, and your upper body function is completely intact. The challenging news is that you have significant injuries to your legs and extensive scarring from the blast. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She tried to move her legs, but felt nothing below her waist. Tears began flowing down her cheeks as the reality of her situation became clear. Will I walk again? It's too early to make definitive predictions. You have some sensation in your right leg, which is encouraging. With extensive rehabilitation and possibly additional surgeries, you may regain some function. But I need to be honest with you, your military career as it was is over. Sarah closed her eyes and let the tears flow freely. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, had been taken away by a bomb maker who had made her his personal target. The life she had planned, the career she loved, the identity she had built as a Marine, all of it changed in an instant. Over the following weeks, Sarah underwent multiple surgeries to repair damage to her legs and lower spine. The scarring from the explosion was extensive, covering her legs and lower torso in a pattern that told the story of her encounter with the Taliban bomb maker. Some scars were from the blast itself, others from the surgeries required to save her life. Physical therapy was the most challenging thing Sarah had ever attempted. Each day, therapists worked with her to rebuild strength and regain whatever function was possible. Progress was slow and often painful, both physically and emotionally. 3 months after the explosion, Sarah had regained limited feeling in her right leg but remained paralyzed on her left side. She could stand with assistance and take a few steps using specialized equipment, but independent walking remained impossible. The decision to medically retire from the Marines was devastating but inevitable. Sarah's injuries prevented her from performing the duties required of an active-duty Marine, and her EOD career was permanently ended. At 24 years old, she was facing a complete reconstruction of her life and identity. The retirement ceremony was held at Camp Pendleton, with Sarah's mother, Maria, in attendance along with members of her unit from both deployments. She was awarded a Purple Heart for her combat injuries and a second Bronze Star Medal for her actions on the day she was wounded. Lieutenant Colonel Stevens, the base commander, delivered remarks that honored Sarah's service and sacrifice. Maureen Martinez represents the very best of our Corps. Her courage, dedication, and willingness to put the lives of others before her own embody everything we stand for. While her active duty service has ended, her contributions to our nation will never be forgotten. As Sarah sat in her wheelchair receiving the medals, she felt a complex mixture of pride and loss. She was proud of her service and the lives she had saved, but devastated by the end of the career that had defined her adult life. After the ceremony, Anderson and Murphy approached Sarah's wheelchair. Both men had tears in their eyes as they saluted their former teammate. Martinez, it's been the honor of my life serving with you, Anderson said. You saved more lives than we'll ever know, including ours on more than one occasion. Murphy nodded in agreement. You're the bravest person I've ever met, and you always will be. Marine or not, you're still our hero. Sarah returned their salutes from her wheelchair, knowing that while her time as an active Marine was over, the bonds she had formed with these men would last forever. As she left the base for the final time, Sarah faced an uncertain future. She had no idea what came next, how she would support herself, or how she would find meaning in a life that looked nothing like what she had planned. The scars on her legs served as a daily reminder of the price she had paid for her service, but they also represented her survival and her unbroken spirit. What Sarah didn't know was that her story was far from over, and that the scars she saw as symbols of loss would soon become something entirely different in the eyes of others, who would recognize them for what they truly represented. Sarah's transition to civilian life was harder than any combat mission she had ever undertaken. The small apartment she rented near the VA hospital in San Diego felt like a prison after the open spaces and clear mission objectives of military life. Days blended together in a haze of physical therapy appointments, disability paperwork, and the crushing weight of figuring out who she was when she was no longer a Marine. Her mother, Maria, had moved from Los Angeles to help care for her daughter during the transition. Every morning, she would help Sarah with tasks that had once been automatic: getting dressed, preparing meals, navigating the basic challenges of daily life with limited mobility. "Mija, you need to get out of this apartment," Maria would say gently. "Sitting here every day isn't helping you heal." Sarah would nod and make promises to go out, but most days she found excuses to stay home. The stares from strangers when she used her wheelchair, the pitying looks from people who saw her scars during physical therapy. It all felt overwhelming for someone who had once commanded respect in some of the world's most dangerous places. 6 months after leaving the Marines, Sarah's savings were running low, and she knew she needed to find work. The VA had provided job training resources, but nothing seemed to match her skills or interests. Office jobs felt meaningless after years of life-or-death decisions. Customer service roles seemed impossible when she could barely manage conversations with strangers about her condition. It was during a particularly low moment that Sarah received a call that would change the trajectory of her new life. The caller identified himself as Dr. James Morrison, director of a veterans support program at a local community college. "Ms. Martinez, I've heard about your service record and your current situation. I'm calling because we have a program that might interest you. We're looking for veterans to speak to young people about military service, leadership, and overcoming challenges. The position offers flexible hours and the opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives." Sarah's first instinct was to decline. The thought of standing in front of a group of teenagers and talking about her experiences felt impossible. "Dr. Morrison, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think I'm the right person for that kind of work." "May I ask why?" Sarah looked down at her scarred legs, visible beneath the shorts she wore for her physical therapy exercises. "I'm not exactly an inspiring success story right now." "Ms. Martinez, with respect, I think you're exactly the kind of success story these young people need to hear." After much persuasion from both Dr. Morrison and her mother, Sarah agreed to try the program for one semester. Her first speaking engagement was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at a high school in a rough neighborhood that reminded her of where she had grown up. The night before her first presentation, Sarah barely slept. She had faced down Taliban bomb makers without this level of anxiety. Speaking to a classroom full of teenagers about her experiences felt more terrifying than any combat mission. The high school principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, met Sarah in the parking lot and helped her navigate the wheelchair-accessible entrance to the building. As they moved through the hallways, Sarah noticed the familiar signs of an underfunded school serving a challenging population, outdated textbooks, worn facilities, and security measures that suggested ongoing problems with violence and disruption. "The students you'll be speaking to today are our at-risk group," Mrs. Rodriguez explained as they approached the classroom. "Many come from difficult backgrounds, and some are considering dropping out. We're hoping that hearing from someone like you might help them see different possibilities for their futures." The classroom contained about 25 students, ages 16 to 18, representing the diversity of the local community. As Sarah wheeled herself to the front of the room, she noticed several students whispering and pointing at her wheelchair and visible scars. In the back row, a group of boys began snickering. Sarah caught fragments of their comments. "Look at her legs. What happened to her? This is supposed to inspire us." For a moment, Sarah felt the familiar urge to retreat, to make an excuse and leave before embarrassing herself further. Then she remembered something Staff Sergeant Reynolds had told her during boot camp. "Marines don't run from challenges, Martinez. They run toward them." Sarah took a deep breath and began speaking, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Good morning. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I'm here to talk to you about service, sacrifice, and finding your purpose in life." One of the boys in the back row, a tall kid with gang tattoos on his arms, raised his hand with obvious sarcasm. "Miss, what happened to your legs? Did you get in a car accident or something?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the entire class watching to see how she would respond. Some students looked embarrassed by their classmates' rudeness, while others waited to see if the adult would break down or get angry. Sarah looked directly at the boy who had asked the question. "I was injured by an explosive device while serving as a Marine in Afghanistan. I was trying to disarm a bomb that would have killed children in a school very much like this one." The snickering stopped immediately. The boy with tattoos looked down at his desk, suddenly uncomfortable with the attention he had drawn to himself. "But you asked about my scars, and that's a fair question," Sarah continued. "These scars tell a story, and I think some of you might understand that better than most." Sarah began rolling up her sleeves, revealing additional scarring on her arms from the explosion. "Every scar on my body represents a choice I made. Some represent choosing to serve my country when I could have stayed safe at home. Some represent choosing to stay at my post under enemy fire when I could have run for cover. And some represent choosing to try disarming a bomb that I knew might kill me, because the alternative was letting it kill innocent children." The classroom was completely silent now. Even the most disruptive students were listening intently. "I'm guessing some of you have scars too," Sarah continued. "Maybe not from war, but from the battles you fight every day just to survive in this neighborhood. Maybe from making hard choices about who to trust, what risks to take, how to stay safe while still moving forward with your lives." A girl in the third row, who had been staring at her desk throughout the presentation, looked up with tears in her eyes. Sarah could see faint marks on the girl's wrists that suggested a different kind of battle. "The difference between scars and wounds," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm, "is that wounds are still bleeding. Scars mean you survived something that could have destroyed you. Scars are proof that you're stronger than whatever tried to break you." She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "I spent months feeling sorry for myself because my military career was over, because I couldn't do the job I loved anymore, because I looked different and moved differently than I used to. I was so focused on what I had lost that I couldn't see what I had gained." "What did you gain?" asked a quiet voice from the middle of the room. It was a small boy who looked younger than his classmates, probably advanced academically but struggling socially. "I gained the knowledge that I can survive anything life throws at me. I gained a story that can help other people understand their own strength. I gained the ability to recognize courage when I see it, even when other people might miss it." Sarah looked around the room, making eye contact with as many students as possible. "Every person in this room has survived things that would break other people. You've made it this far despite obstacles that many people will never face. That takes courage, even if nobody's given you medals for it." The boy with tattoos in the back row raised his hand again, but this time his tone was different. "Miss Martinez, how did you know you wanted to be in the military?" "I knew because I wanted to be part of something bigger than my own problems. I wanted to use my life to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. But there are lots of ways to do that: being a teacher, a nurse, a police officer, a firefighter, a social worker. The military was just my path." For the next hour, Sarah answered questions about her service, her injuries, and her current life. The students were engaged in a way that clearly surprised Mrs. Rodriguez, who had expected disruption and disinterest from this particular group. As the class period ended, several students approached Sarah's wheelchair. The girl with the scars on her wrists hung back until the others had left, then approached hesitantly. "Miss Martinez, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you ever wish you hadn't volunteered for that mission, the one where you got hurt?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "That's something I think about a lot. If I hadn't volunteered, I'd still be walking. I'd probably still be in the Marines. My life would be completely different." "So do you regret it?" "No," Sarah said without hesitation. "Because that bomb would have killed children, maybe dozens of them. When I think about those children going home to their families that day instead of dying in an explosion, I know I made the right choice." The girl nodded slowly. "I've never heard an adult talk about scars like that before." "How do adults usually talk about them?" "Like they're something to be ashamed of, something to hide, like they make you damaged." Sarah reached out and gently touched the girl's hand. Scars don't make you damaged, they make you a survivor. Don't let anyone tell you different. After that first speaking engagement, word spread quickly through the education community about the veteran who could connect with even the most challenging students. Sarah began receiving invitations to speak at other schools, youth programs, and community organizations. Each presentation was different, tailored to the specific audience, but Sarah's core message remained consistent. Your scars tell the story of your survival, your strength, and your refusal to be defeated by circumstances beyond your control. Over the following months, Sarah's confidence grew along with her reputation as an effective speaker. She developed presentation skills, learned to read audiences, and discovered that her story resonated with people far beyond the at-risk teenagers she had initially been hired to address. It was during a presentation at a military recruitment event that Sarah first encountered active-duty Marines who responded to her story with something other than respect and admiration. She was speaking to a mixed audience of high school students and their parents about military service when she noticed a group of young Marines in the back of the auditorium. During the question and answer period, one of the Marines, a cocky lance corporal who couldn't have been more than 20 years old, raised his hand with an expression that Sarah immediately recognized as trouble. "Ma'am, with all due respect, don't you think it's kind of misleading to encourage these kids to join the military when you couldn't hack it yourself? I mean, you got blown up and had to quit. That's not exactly a success story." The auditorium fell silent. Parents looked shocked by the young Marine's rudeness, while students waited to see how Sarah would respond to this direct challenge to her credibility. Sarah had faced this kind of attitude before from young Marines who saw her injuries as evidence of failure rather than sacrifice. It hurt every time, but she had learned to use these moments as teaching opportunities. "Lance Corporal," she said, nodding his rank from his uniform, "you're absolutely right that I'm no longer serving on active duty. My injuries made it impossible for me to continue the career I loved. But I need to correct one thing you said. I didn't quit. I was medically retired after serving with distinction in 2 combat deployments and earning multiple awards for valor." The young Marine's confident expression began to waver as Sarah continued. "But more importantly, your question reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what success looks like in military service. Success isn't measured by whether you come home without scars. Success is measured by whether you accomplished your mission and whether you served with honor." Sarah gestured toward her scarred legs. "These scars represent successful missions, Lance Corporal. Every bomb I disabled saved lives. Every device I rendered safe meant that American Marines and Afghan civilians went home to their families. The fact that I was eventually injured doesn't erase the success of those missions." The room erupted in spontaneous applause. Parents and students who had been shocked by the young Marine's disrespect were clearly moved by Sarah's dignified response. Even some of the other Marines in the group looked embarrassed by their colleagues' behavior. But the confrontation wasn't over. The Lance Corporal, apparently feeling that he was losing face in front of the audience, pressed his attack. "Come on, ma'am. You're in a wheelchair talking to high school kids instead of serving your country. That's not exactly the life you planned, is it?" Before Sarah could respond, a deep voice from the back of the auditorium cut through the tension like a blade. "Lance Corporal Williams, you will stand at attention and shut your mouth immediately." Every head in the auditorium turned toward the source of the voice. Standing in the back doorway was a Marine officer whose presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the room, but especially from the group of young Marines who had been causing the disruption. The man was tall, probably in his early 50s, with gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. His uniform displayed the eagles of a full colonel, and his chest was covered with ribbons that told the story of a long and distinguished career. Colonel Marcus Reed had not planned to attend the recruitment event. He had been passing by on his way to another meeting when he heard Sarah's presentation through the open doors of the auditorium. What he heard made him stop and listen, and what he saw when he entered the room made him furious. Lance Corporal Williams front and center, now. The young Marine who had been so confident in his criticism a moment earlier now looked pale as he made his way to the front of the auditorium. His fellow Marines watched in silence, knowing that their colleague had made a serious mistake. Colonel Reed's voice carried easily throughout the large room as he addressed not just the wayward Lance Corporal, but the entire audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this Marine's disrespectful behavior. What you've witnessed here is a young man who has confused arrogance with confidence and ignorance with knowledge. He turned his attention to the Lance Corporal standing at rigid attention before him. Williams, this woman has done more for the Corps and for this country in her brief career than you're likely to accomplish in 20 years of service. She has saved countless lives, earned multiple awards for valor, and sacrificed her health in service to her nation. The colonel's voice grew harder. More importantly, she is continuing to serve her country by inspiring young people to consider military service and by representing the best values of our Corps. Meanwhile, you stand here embarrassing yourself, your unit, and your service by disrespecting a veteran who has given more than you can possibly understand. Colonel Reed turned away from the chastened Lance Corporal and walked directly to Sarah's wheelchair. To the shock of everyone in the auditorium, the full colonel came to attention and rendered a perfect military salute to the medically retired Marine. Sergeant Martinez, it is an honor to meet you. Your service record speaks for itself, but more importantly, your continued dedication to serving others embodies everything the Marine Corps stands for. Sarah returned the salute from her wheelchair, tears beginning to form in her eyes. In all her months of speaking to audiences, no one had ever acknowledged her service in such a public and dramatic way. Colonel, thank you for your kind words. It means more than you know. Sergeant Martinez, I've been listening to your presentation, and I have to ask, would you be interested in speaking to Marines about leadership, courage, and service? I think there are some lessons here that my Marines need to learn. The irony of the moment was not lost on anyone in the auditorium. The same scars that the young Lance Corporal had mocked as evidence of failure were now being recognized by a senior officer as symbols of exemplary service. Sir, I would be honored to speak to Marines about these topics. Colonel Reed nodded approvingly. Outstanding. I'll have my staff contact you to arrange something. He paused, then addressed the entire auditorium one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, you've had the privilege of hearing from a true American hero today. Sergeant Martinez represents the very best of our military, and her story should inspire all of us to serve something greater than ourselves. As the colonel prepared to leave, taking the embarrassed Lance Corporal with him, Sarah called out one final comment. Colonel Reed, if I may, Lance Corporal Williams is young and still learning. I hope this experience will help him understand that service takes many forms, and that sometimes the greatest courage is required not in combat, but in continuing to serve after combat has taken its toll. The colonel smiled, recognizing the grace and wisdom in Sarah's response. Sergeant Martinez, that's exactly the kind of leadership our Marines need to learn. After the event ended and the audience dispersed, Sarah sat alone in the auditorium for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The encounter with the disrespectful Lance Corporal had initially hurt, bringing back all her insecurities about her changed circumstances and altered appearance. But Colonel Reed's intervention had done more than just defend her honor. It had helped her realize that her scars weren't marks of failure or shame. They were credentials that established her credibility to speak about courage, sacrifice, and service. For months, Sarah had been thinking of her speaking engagements as a consolation prize, a lesser form of service that she had settled for because she could no longer do real, military work. Now, she understood that her current mission was just as important as anything she had done in uniform. The teenagers she spoke to were fighting everyday battles with poverty, violence, addiction, abuse, and despair. Many of them had never met an adult who understood what it meant to carry scars from those battles. Sarah's story gave them permission to see their own survival as an accomplishment rather than an accident. As she wheeled herself out of the auditorium that day, Sarah felt a sense of purpose that she hadn't experienced since leaving the Marines. Her mission was different now, but it was no less important. Instead of disarming explosive devices that threatened lives, she was disarming the hopelessness and despair that threatened futures. The scars that covered her legs would always remind her of the price she had paid for her service. But now they also reminded her of the strength she had gained, the wisdom she had earned, and the unique ability she had to recognize and nurture courage in others. Sarah Martinez was no longer the Marine who walked into danger to save lives. She was something equally valuable, the veteran who helped others understand that their scars were proof of their strength, their survival, and their unlimited potential for future service to others. The Marines who had laughed at her scars had failed to understand what Colonel Reed recognized immediately, that those marks told the story of a hero who had found a new way to serve, and whose greatest battles were still ahead of her.